Good morning. Hi, everybody. I thought I would read you some more Baba Berenstein. And on the computer, it said Alibaba, but it's actually Alibaba, B-A-B-A. And do you remember last time I read to you, he had forgot his library card, and so he ran all the way home and he got his library card and he came all the way back and the library door was locked. Okay, and so he was going to help the gentleman carry a box in, so he was hoping he was getting the library that way. So here we go. Just then the door opened, and the driver and Alibaba walked inside with the packages. You have to sign here, the man told the librarian as she handed him a clipboard. Alibaba put the smaller package on the front desk, then walked quickly and quietly toward the steps leading up to the children's room. He could hear children's librarian talking as he neared the top. She was telling a story to the class. The lights were turned off and the room was in almost dark, but not quite dark. The librarian was telling a spooky Halloween story. All eyes were on the librarian. It was dark, but not too dark to see for Alibaba to see his way to an empty chair in the back row. He tried to sit down quietly, but the scraping noise of the chair legs against the tile floor seemed so loud when it was so quiet, and Alibaba stared straight ahead at the librarian. "You did it!" shrieked the librarian, and she pointed her finger at Alibaba. Alibaba jumped up. "No, I didn't," he said. I didn't mean to, but I couldn't help it. I forgot my card." Everyone was laughing. The librarian's shout had been the last line of the story. She wasn't accusing Alibaba of anything. But nevertheless, he'd given himself away. The lights were turned on and the children were told to look for books. The librarian led the way to the biography section and began to help everyone select books. Miss Melrose went over to Alibaba, and even with a frown on her face, she looked pretty. He thought, "Well, where were you?" she said. "I went to get my library card," he said. "You know you're not to leave the school without permission." "But I did have permission. The whole class left together. I just went home and got my card before I came here," said Alibaba. It didn't seem like such a big crime to him. "During the school day, you're under my jurisdiction, or my responsibility," said the teacher. "You can't just rush home when you please. I don't know where you were. I was very concerned about you." "I thought you wouldn't notice. I wasn't gone very long," said Alibaba. "Of course I noticed," said Miss Melrose. "I wouldn't be a very good teacher if I didn't notice that a student of mine had disappeared. I had to phone the school office and report you missing." "Did you think I was kidnapped?" asked Alibaba. "Are the police looking for me?" It was an exciting possibility. "I didn't know," admitted the teacher. "I had better call the school and tell them that you've turned up. Now go and pick out a book. I will have to think about how you're going to be punished." "Punished?" said Alibaba. "All I did was go home and get my library card." "Why didn't you tell me that you'd left your card at home this morning when I asked the class?" asked the teacher. "I didn't want you to be angry," said Alibaba. "I'm angry now instead," she said, but she smiled as she said it. "I think your punishment is that you'll have to be my partner all the way to the school building. I don't want to have to worry about losing you again." "All the way back to school?" Alibaba said. "All the way," said Mrs. Melrose. Alibaba joined his classmates at the bookshelves. Miss Melrose helped him to select two biographies. One was about George Washington, and the other one was about Abraham Lincoln. Those were both presidents of ours, right? Really, really long time ago. "Neither of these men ever told lies," she said. "They were both known for their honesty. Maybe neither of them left their library cards inside the pockets of library books underneath their beds," said Alibaba. "Maybe they would have told a lie then." Miss Melrose went over to the shelves and selected the third book. "Perhaps you should read this biography instead. It's about a man with a vivid imagination. The world needs people like that." Alibaba looked at the book, and it was about Thomas Edison. Did he tell lies?" "I don't know," said Miss Melrose. "You'll have to read the book to find out." The students lined up and checked out their books, and they put on their jackets and walked down the steps out of the library building. This time, instead of being at the end of the line, Alibaba was up at the front, and he walked all the way back to school next to Miss Melrose. It was supposed to be a punishment, but it wasn't bad at all. Alibaba thought he wouldn't mind being punished like this every day. Chapter 2. Alibaba and the Case of Kelly's Deli. Oh boy. Ever since he was very young, Alibaba had been intrigued by mysteries. He loved television programs and movies that showed how mysteries were solved. He tried to imitate the detectives and the private eyes that he'd seen on the screen, and he knew that a good detective kept his eyes open all the time. Everything was a potential clue, and every day at school and at home, Ali Baba watched carefully and noted everything that he saw. He considered himself the private eye of the public school. Who knew? Maybe someday he would solve a really big mystery and make a real name for himself. Ali Baba was always on the lookout for things that seemed suspicious, not quite right. And recently he'd become aware that his neighbor, Mr. Salmon, had been behaving strangely. Ali Baba lived on the 6th floor, and several times in recent weeks, when he had ridden in the elevator, Mr. Salmon was there too. And Mr. Salmon was a large, balding man with a mustache and a very small beard. And his wife was a tiny woman, only about half his size. Once Mr. and Mrs. Berenstein had been speaking about the Salmons, and Ali Baba learned that Mr. Salmon worked at a home as a CPA. That in itself is quite strange. Ali Baba didn't know what CPA meant, but he didn't think it would be good. If his neighbor was a doctor or a lawyer or a salesman, wouldn't he come out and admit it? Hiding his business behind some mysterious initials seemed very suspicious to Ali Baba. The first few times he found himself in the elevator with Mr. Salmon, Ali Baba occupied himself with trying to figure out what the letters CPA stood for. Captain of Police? Chief of Private Arsonists? Pirate activities? Criminal and pirate activities? It was about the third or fourth time that they were riding up together in the elevator that Ali Baba realized that Mr. Salmon always got off on the 5th floor. There was nothing wrong with getting off on the 5th floor of the building if you lived there, but Mr. Salmon lived on the 7th floor. Certainly this was most strange and very suspicious behavior. Ali Baba decided that the next time he was in the elevator with Mr. Salmon, he'd get off on the 4th floor and quietly walk up the stairs and spy on his neighbor. He also kept a lookout for Mr. Salmon when he was out on the street, and that's when he discovered that Mr. Salmon spent a lot of time in Kelly's Deli. Kelly's Deli was just around the corner from where Ali Baba lived. His mother, who did most of her shopping once a week in a large supermarket 3 blocks away, nevertheless always seemed to be out of groceries at crucial moments. Hardly a day went by that she didn't need an extra quart of milk or half a dozen eggs. It was a nuisance to have to run these errands all the time, but it did give Ali Baba a chance to keep his eyes on the neighborhood. Everyone used Kelly's Deli. So Ali Baba wasn't surprised the first time he discovered Mr. Salmon in the delicatessen when he went on one of his mother's emergency errands. As Ali Baba paid for the jar of mayonnaise his mother had sent him to get, he watched Mr. Salmon. He had bought a wedge of cheesecake from the row of cakes that were displayed behind the glass divider at the counter. There was a fudgy chocolate one that looked especially delicious, but his mother had never, ever bought any of them. Now he watched as Mr. Salmon removed the cheesecake from the paper bag in which it had been placed and began to devour it right inside the store. It was gone in about 3 mouthfuls. Ali Baba watched as Mr. Salmon licked his lips. There's Mr. Salmon. It's Ali Baba watching him. And then he took a handkerchief from his pocket and rubbed his mustache and his lower lip. And Ali Baba felt thirsty at the thought of eating a whole piece of cake without a single drop of milk to wash it down. However, Mr. Salmon didn't seem to miss a glass of milk, and after crushing the paper bag, he set it on the counter and walked out of the store. Cheesecake Partners Association. That's what CPA means. The second time he met Mr. Salmon in Kelly's Deli, the man was eating again. When Ali Baba walked into the store, he saw Mr. Salmon standing off to the side holding a large slice of carrot cake on a paper plate. What made that carrot cake look so delicious was that it had fluffy white frosting on top, and between its layers, Mr. Salmon succeeded in eating the cake in just a few minutes. It was almost supper time as he watched Mr. Salmon chew up his last piece of cake. When Ali Baba got back to the building, Mr. Salmon was waiting for the elevator. The man and the boy got into it together, and Ali Baba pushed 6, which was his floor, and then he noticed that Mr. Salmon pushed 5. It reminded him that he was going to spy on his neighbor, so he pushed number 4. The elevator started up, and when it reached the 4th floor, the door opened. If Mr. Salmon thought it was strange that Ali Baba got off at the wrong floor, he didn't say anything. Ali Baba dashed up the stairs and was poised near the top step, panting for breath. When the elevator stopped on the 5th floor, the door opened, and although he could not see him, he heard Mr. Salmon get out. The elevator closed again, and Ali Baba listened. He wondered what Mr. Salmon was doing on the 5th floor. Did he stop to visit someone? Was he going to pass on some secret message or a secret parcel? He heard Mr. Salmon's footsteps. The older man had begun walking up the next flight of steps. Was it possible that he knew that Ali Baba was hiding nearby, so he wasn't going to deliver the message after all? Slowly, Mr. Salmon climbed each step after step, and quietly waiting until his neighbor was a flight ahead of him and therefore no longer in view, Ali Baba followed Mr. Salmon. Mr. Salmon paused briefly on the 6th floor and then continued to the 7th. Ali Baba crouched behind. On the 7th floor, he crouched behind the stairwell and listened as Mr. Salmon opened a door with a key. Even without checking, Ali Baba knew the man was opening his own door. Why had he gotten off on the 5th floor? Had he realized that he was being followed? There was something fishy about Mr. Salmon and his activities, and on that day, Ali Baba Berenstein was 9 years, 4 months, and 29 days old. His mother again asked him to go to Kelly's Deli. She wanted a jar of olives to use in a new recipe she was going to make for supper. As Ali Baba didn't like olives, he knew he would only spend half his mealtime picking the olives out of his portion. It seemed unfair that he had to go and purchase the olives if he wouldn't be eating them. Once he arrived at Kelly's Deli, he was glad he was there. Standing in front of the glass case studying the various pastries was Mr. Salmon. The cheesecake is extra fresh today. We just got it in this morning, said the man behind the counter, who Ali Baba had always assumed was Mr. Kelly. How about a nice slice of pecan pie, offered Mr. Kelly. Mr. Salmon shook his head. No, not today. Suddenly an idea occurred to Ali Baba. Could it be that the cakes and pies in Kelly's Deli were a sort of code? Did carrot cake mean one thing and cheesecake mean another? If Mr. Salmon selected a particular dessert, would he be telling Mr. Kelly about some sort of deal? Perhaps cheesecake meant meet me at the bank, or I have documents for you. Ali Baba watched as Mr. Salmon chose a piece of fudgy chocolate cake. It had 3 layers, and each was attached to the other by a thick frosting that made Ali Baba's mouth water just looking at it. CPA. Chocolate, pure, and appetizing. Crime Patrol Anonymous. Citizens for Proud America. Convicted Prisoners Association. The possibilities were endless, and the number of cakes on display seemed endless too. How could Ali Baba ever break the code and discover just what Mr. Salmon was up to? He was so busy trying to work out the mysteries of the cake code that he bought olives without pimentos, although his mother especially reminded him that she wanted olives with pimentos. As a result, when Ali Baba got home, he was told to go back to Kelly's Deli again, and he went down in the elevator. He wondered where Mr. Salmon was, and although he'd left Kelly's Deli, he hadn't returned home after devouring his chocolate cake. If he had, Ali Baba would have seen him. When Ali Baba entered Kelly's Deli for the second time that day, his question was answered. Mr. Salmon hadn't gone home. Although Mr. Salmon left the delicatessen before Ali Baba had, like Ali Baba, he returned there again. CPA, Counterfeit Presidential Agency. Ali Baba just couldn't figure out what was going on, and Mr. Salmon wasn't buying cake this time. I want a pound of the health salad, he said, pointing to the display of cut-up fresh vegetables. That seemed a rather strange code coming from Mr. Salmon. He must have realized that Ali Baba had been listening to him and changed his tactics. Ali Baba was becoming more and more certain he was watching a spy in action. Anything else? Yes, I'll have a quarter of a pound of sliced turkey breast. You a stranger and stranger. Mr. Salmon paid for his packages and left the store. Ali Baba quickly explained to Mr. Kelly about his error. Luckily, olives with pimentos cost the same as olives without, so it was a simple matter to exchange the one for the other, and Ali Baba was out of the shop within seconds. He raced home, hoping to catch up with Mr. Salmon. The heavy-bearded Mr. Salmon was waiting at the elevator, and he held the bag with his purchases. The elevator stopped at the ground floor. Mrs. Cummings, who lived on the 3rd floor, got off. She nodded to Mr. Salmon. Ali Baba wondered if she knew what he was up to. Nice day, said Mr. Salmon with a smile. That was suspicious, too. It looked as if it might rain at any second. Mr. Salmon got into the elevator and pushed 5. Ali Baba resisted the desire to follow and push 4. His mother was waiting for the olives, and besides, Mr. Salmon was already suspicious of him. So Ali Baba pushed 6. And when the elevator reached the 5th floor, Mr. Salmon sighed. And I'll read you some more tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. Love you guys. Bye.